Welcome to today's Reinvention virtual chat, which is also being recorded for my podcast, The Power of Reinvention. So please hold your questions for the end, and I will be sure to address them when we get to the Q&A. Welcome, everybody. I'm Kathy Sharp-Ross, your host, and I'm so excited for Marlo Lyons to be my guest on today's Reinvention virtual chat show and podcast, The Power of Reinvention. We are recording live, both of them, which is really fun. It makes it a little complicated, but it's really special to have everybody on both a live virtual chat while we're recording the podcast. So thank you for all being here. Today, we're going to touch on transitioning to a new career, finding your dream job, and Marlo's journey to get to where she is today after a wonderful career with transitions of her own. You'll be inspired by fabulous insights, tips, and tools from a woman who's had great successes and tremendous reinvention moments. As some of you may know, this show is inspired by my book, Reinvent Your Life, What Are You Waiting For?, as well as my Reinvention virtual chat series, as you're all here, which launched right after my book in late March last year and in response to the postponed book tour and events. I hope you will enjoy today's conversation and walk away feeling inspired to reinvent and with a new sense of what is possible in your life. So before we jump in, I want to welcome you, Marlo. I am so glad to have you here. Super excited to be connected. And, thanks to Brett, your wonderful husband, who I've been doing business with forever. I'm just thrilled that he's here as well and that he connected you and I.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I'm so glad that we connected. We had such a great chat. I could have talked to you for 20 hours.
I know. Well, here we go. We'll try to distill it down a little, but I feel like the conversation won't end there. So I'm going to give, for those who don't know Marlo, just a little background. She has spent more than 20 years inspiring, motivating, and empowering people to excel in their careers and businesses. Marlo transitioned her own career from TV news reporter for more than a decade to entertainment lawyer, to HR business partner in both entertainment technology and the medical technology industries, to executive and career coach. Marlo's HR career coaching and leadership expertise, combined with her own personal career transitions, has provided her deep insights, which are the crux of her career transition strategies used to help others forge their own career pathway. She started her career in Medford, Oregon as an associate producer of medical stories from the local ABC TV affiliate. From there, she became a TV news reporter in 5 cities, culminating in a consumer investigative reporting role for the CBS affiliate in Oklahoma City. After attending Oklahoma City University Law School at night while reporting full-time, she set her sights on LA and became an entertainment lawyer at NBC Universal and then Viacom, leading production risk management and diligence for reality shows across multiple channels. After more than a decade, she transitioned again, obtaining her certifications in HR and coaching. Marlo has since coached hundreds of clients on how to transition their own careers and find more meaningful employment. And most recently, Marlo's just published her own new book, Wanted, A New Career, the definitive playbook for transitioning to a new career or finding your dream job. So I couldn't cut any of what you've done out of that little bio, because this is all about these transitions and so many different career moves. So since this is really where you really excel and where you're really speaking to people and coaching people now, I could not share that detail of your life in and of itself. So welcome.
It's a long road, right?
It is a long road. And I'm thrilled. I'm so excited to have you here and to be able to have this conversation. So many people are going through so many different changes right now in their worlds, in their lives, in their careers, whether it's forced or it's invited upon them. And it's a challenge. So before I continue, for those who come here regularly, they know that I usually start every one of my reinvention virtual chats. I think today is like number 101 now. It's pretty staggering. I always start with a reading from my book. But as I was reading your book, I thought, you know what? I need to read an excerpt from your book today. So I'm honing in on chapter 2, and I'm just going to share a little bit of what Marlo writes here. And there's so much connection in our sort of perspectives. And I think the work that we do in helping other people recognize how to make these transitions, these reinvention moments. So this chapter is called Assessing What's Important to You. How many times have you made a list of pros and cons before making an important decision? We may come up with more pros or more cons to skew the choice, but it will still have to be made, and sometimes it will go against what the list seems to say. Don't worry, this chapter won't suggest that you write such a list for various career choices. Those lists are nice, but they don't say what you truly need to know. All they reveal is what you like and don't like about your current or prospective position. Instead, take a step back and evaluate more deeply what drives you in life and in the workplace. Before making any decision, especially one as important as your career, it's best to first identify and understand your values. The Coactive Training Institute is a professional coach training and certification program that has trained more than 65,000 coaches, including employees in a third of the Fortune 100 companies. Coactive teaches, quote, "Our values serve as a compass pointing out what it means to be true to oneself. When we honor our values on a regular and consistent basis, life is good and fulfilling." Simply put, making career changes or life decisions based on external pressures or without identifying and understanding your values could lead to impulsivity, faulty assumptions, and or setups for failure. I'm sure you know a few people who jump from one bad relationship to the next. They probably never took the time to think about what is truly important to them. They're only interested in getting out of a bad situation or showing someone they found something better. If you don't think about your values, each relationship is compared to the one before without the wisdom of knowing whether these significant others were able to provide something truly important and meaningful. One relationship may seem better than the last one, but not for long, because they aren't filling most of all your core values. And the same goes for job seekers.
Yes,
Have
it
you
does.
jumped from one bad job to the next? There's a chance you were looking to just get out of a bad situation, or maybe you jumped for a higher title or more money instead of a position that would truly satisfy all of your values. If you understand your values and live them at work, you will be happy and fulfilled, more engaged and productive. I could go on and on, but we got the real deal right here, Marlo. So we're going to talk to you about this in depth.
Great.
So I've got a question for you before we delve too deep into this. And I know many people that are here to sort of walk away with some pretty good nuggets of what you share in your book. And I just want to take a step back because you've been on this path yourself. You have gone through, as I shared at the top of the conversation, so many different transitions and reinvention moments. And I want to kind of go back to your very early years, like maybe the same age as your kids.
Okay.
And their dreams and their goals for life. And when you sit around the dinner table or the playground and they say, when I grow up, I want to be X. So who was little Marlo? And, what was it that you were dreaming about doing? And, are you on the path that you ever imagined yourself to be? Or have you taken so many twists and turns and you're just, marveling at where you are today?
When I was little, I think I like to explore, right? I grew up in the same house all the way until I went off to college. We never moved, but we did travel. And I was an explorer in some ways. I would get on my bike, I would ride 8 hours, I'd disappear. Back in the day when you could do that and parents didn't worry about you so much, right? No cell phones, put a Walkman on in my spandex shorts, put the headphones on, and I would ride. And, one day I even rode to Bruce Springsteen's house, got a flat tire, got an autograph. But yeah, but I would just explore. And I never really knew that you could have more than one career. I mean, my dad owned a business. My dad's here today, and he owned a business. So prior to that, he did work in another business, but he owned a business and he was very successful. And, my mom was a teacher and then worked in the business. But I didn't really think like, oh, you get one job and you keep it forever. At the same time, when I took my reporter job, I thought for sure I was going to be a reporter. And I remember my father saying to me, we used to watch the news every night together, and he would say, maybe someday you do that. You might be interested in that. When I went off to college, I took some internships, NBC, Conus Communications, all these different places. I actually interned for CBS News Night Watch with Charlie Rose. No issues there, just saying. I interviewed for Lee Thompson, or interned for Lee Thompson at NBC. And I loved it. I wanted to be a reporter, just wanted to be a reporter. And so speaking of adventure, I was about to graduate and I had no job. And so I called my dad and I sat with him. I said, okay, I want to drive from DC to Texas and back. And I want to interview at every TV station between here and there. And he looked at me like I was crazy. At the same time, he said, if that's what you think you need to do, okay. Remember, this is before cell phones and I didn't have a computer. And there was no internet. So I would drive from city. I had a whole schedule, 9 a.m. meet with one news director, noon the next one, 3 o'clock the next one, drive to the next one, research. And that's what I did. And I came home with no job.
Wow.
But the day I came back, there was a phone message from a TV station in Oregon. And the news director said, hey, got your resume. And I thought maybe, I have a position for you. And it was that associate producer position. I was like, I'll take it. Didn't even think much of it. Again, this is back in the day, I was making $10,600 a year, 9,700 after taxes, not kidding. But I took the job and my dad and I drove across the country. And that was my first job. Worked my way up, reporting. You have to move up in reporting. I moved from there to Indiana. I went from Oregon to Indiana to Ohio to then Connecticut. But how I got to Connecticut is I got fired.
Oh, let's talk about that for a moment. So, so often, people don't have a reinvention in their back pocket, things like that, really sort of sideswipe them. And how was that
Marlo,
for you? Josh, we're on a podcast. We're not taking questions. I'm going to mute you. Sorry, go on, Marla.
Yeah, so I was fired, and I think back then it was tragic. I mean, absolutely tragic. I think anybody who's fired, it's really hard. Part of my story now, right? Because at the time I realized, all I thought at the time was my boss is a jerk. My boss is a jerk. My boss is a jerk. As we all think when we get fired. But, my boss may have been a jerk, but I also was very mature, and I'll own to that. I think when you grow up and you mature and you have more emotional intelligence, you kind of realize what you did wrong. And I absolutely did things wrong. I was unengaged about 6 months earlier. I had been engaged to somebody. I was unengaged. I was a pretty angry person. And I wasn't exhibiting what I would call professional behavior in the workplace. I was super angry all the time. And so I got fired. And I thought to myself, what do I do now? And so I reached out to the few contacts I had, didn't understand the concept of networking. And I started trying to figure out, what can I do? I want to get out of TV news, but I realized I was going to have to start over. Now, remember, I had worked my way up to a whopping $26,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to start over.
And also in a career that you were so passionate about creating for yourself. So the notion of sort of giving that up and turning away from that, is that hard?
I couldn't find any job where I wouldn't have to start over down at the bottom. And so I decided I was going to get back into TV news to get out. So I took a freelance job in Hartford, Connecticut, and it was a great job, but I was depressed in some ways, had to kind of figure out my way. And then I started interviewing, and I took a full-time consumer investigative job in Oklahoma City. And that job was pivotal. I mean, I did two things. One, I went to see a therapist, quite frankly. I needed to get over the ex, get over the firing. I had a lot of things going on, and get over the anger, right? So I had to work on that. But the other thing I applied to law school. And I said, I want to back up. I never want this again. I'm doing this as a hobby. I want to back up. And I did.
That's a pretty lofty goal for a backup.
It was, but I always loved the law. I always thought it was interesting. I always thought someday I would go. And so I figured, all right, I'm going to go to law school at night. So I went to the office, the TV station, 8 a.m. I reported on the 4 and the 5 o'clock news. I ran to class from 6 to 9 p.m. And then I met the live truck at 10 p.m. every night and did a live shot, investigative story. And I did that for 3.5 years. And then anytime there was big news, Oklahoma, big for tornadoes, right? So if I had an exam, I would have to use a vacation day because I never knew if I would actually get to the exam. And so I made it work. And then as I was finishing law school, my contract was coming up for renewal and they wanted to renew me for 2 years, but I didn't want to stay. I didn't want to stay for 2 years. So I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure I wanted to work at a law firm. So I started interviewing at a couple law firms and,
So wait, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute because I want to just zero in on something you said. You didn't know what you wanted to do. And
Nope.
I know you address this in your book. We address this all the time when we talk about reinventing your life, and people so often say, I know I want to, but I have no idea what I want to do. I don't know what I'm interested in. I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know, in the case of a career, what I can make a career out of. How did you kind of hone in on that? Do you recall? I mean, sometimes we just do what we do, but do you recall kind of what that process was for you, or where you would even guide others who are in that moment, sort of going, I know I need a change, but I don't know what I want to do?
I knew I wanted to be a writer of some sort. I knew I was a good writer. I knew I didn't want to be on camera anymore. And I was thinking screenwriting at the time. And I talked to a couple people and they told me what it was like and how competitive it was. And I thought, that's okay. Right. But I wanted to be a screenwriter. So I actually started writing scripts while I was sitting there learning law and finishing my law degree. And I took a job at a law firm just because I didn't want to re-sign my contract. And so I did that and I worked and I saved all my money. And then I moved to LA. And I didn't evaluate my values. I didn't evaluate where this would fit. I just knew I liked screenwriting. I liked writing. I liked being creative. And so I moved to LA to be a screenwriter, and we can all see how that worked out. That's impossible, right? And if I had reevaluated, if I had evaluated my values, the one thing I would have noticed is that one of my biggest values is security. Like my number one value is security. And being a screenwriter has no security whatsoever, zero.
Point there. Yeah.
You go from job to job to job to job. And so I was running out of money. And so I took a job at Fireman's Fund Insurance Company in their law department. And they said, we don't care how fast you work. If you want to screenwrite while you're here, you can. So I had a day job like everybody else in Hollywood. And I was screenwriting. And so then I decided I was going to produce movies. I had a law degree. So I took the California bar and passed. And I had a law degree. I'm like, I'm going to try to produce movies. I'm going to bring people together. I can do that. Again, no value evaluate. Didn't evaluate any values whatsoever. And so I had a really big deal, actually. I finally, after years and years and years, I took a job at NBC. That was a friend who said, hey, we're kind of starting this new kind of group. It's Diligence. There's these reality show things that are coming. And, we're looking for somebody who can maybe do like media and legal risk assessment. And you have the media and you have the legal. Do you think maybe you'd be interested? So I took that job. And again, that was back when TV was on a cycle. There was no streaming. So I'd work a quarter, I'd screenwrite a quarter. I'd work a quarter, I'd screenwrite a quarter. Everything was very secular, very on cycle, right? And so I decided I was going to produce movies. I had a deal. I finally met and worked with this hedge fund for a year, and I was super excited. And I remember I was about to get engaged. Life was going great. And I had a deal we were about to sign, worked with a lawyer, got all the paperwork done, 9 million against 90 million for a slate of films. I was going to put it all together. I had my resignation letter in my drawer. And guess what year that was? 2008, October. Do you remember what happened then?
The crash.
The AIG crash. Yep. So I didn't really get it at first. I was kind of like, they're not signing the paperwork. I didn't get the paperwork back. What's going on?
Yeah, it was like the big pause.
Yeah. Not only did it pause, the hedge fund went under. Threw all the paperwork in a drawer, got engaged, got married, and said, I'm done with that. Can't do it anymore. Stayed at my NBC job. And then we decided.
So was that a moment, let me ask you something. Was that a moment where you said, okay, temporarily, I'm going to sort of give up my dream? And there are so many ways to take moments like that, right? Not now, but later. This could be a 10-year journey. So not now is okay, but later maybe fine. Was it not now, not ever. You know, that moment for you.
For me, it was,
And it sounds like you're sort of like a Renaissance woman, like, you know, every time something, you know, sort of doesn't meet with the criteria of where you need to be, you're like, okay, you know what,
next.
I'm gonna move on to the next thing, which is very resilient and really incredible that you're able to do that.
Yeah, I was sad.
So,
Don't get me wrong. It was
yeah,
hard,
well, that's, you
right?
know,
It
I
was
think
hard.
that
I'd
there's a
finally
reality in
done
that
it.
feeling.
Yeah, it was
Right.
sad. It was hard, but I think it was, I think I, you know, since I had just gotten engaged, I was thinking to myself, you know, let me get married. Let me get married and kind of dig into that for a little bit and just breathe, just take a breather. And so I took a breather, and I realized, you know, we wanted to have children. And I realized, wow, you know, if I become a screenwriter or a producer, I'm never going to be home. Again, you know, another value, right? Wanting to actually raise my children, wanting to be around. Again, didn't identify that as a value necessarily at the time, but I realized, you know, that was fun when I was single, but, you know, I don't think I really want to do this when I have children. So still didn't know what I wanted to do, like long term. Wasn't like upset about the job I had. I still really liked it, but I knew I wanted something else. Like I wanted something more. So we decided to adopt. So I was unable to have children, and we decided to adopt. And so I put my we you know, interviewed with the adoption agency and did all that stuff, and we put our paperwork in, and they told us 6 months. And so I had an interview at Viacom, didn't think much of it. You know, another interview at Viacom. They wanted to send me to the final interview, and this was about 2.5 weeks later, 3 weeks later, and all of a sudden we became parents.
I love it.
So 3 weeks later, from the day we put in our paperwork, we become parents, and we're sitting in Chicago adopting our daughter. And I remember sitting there going, what do I tell them? I can't take a new job. No way. Like there's no, like brand newborn. Are you kidding me? And so I wrote them an email saying a funny thing happened on the way to MTV. That was my subject.
That's great.
And I said, hey, I know you wanted me to meet with the general counsel, but I'm in Chicago, and hello, I'm a mom. And so they were, you know, glorious and wonderful. And they said, well, let us know when you get home. I came home, and with a 2-week-old, I interviewed with the general counsel, and then I just belabored. I was just like, oh, I can't take this job. Like, what am I going to do? Longer commute. I have a baby, you know, and I wound up taking the job. I took the job with a 1-month-old. So it's 6 weeks. I started she was 6 weeks old when I started the new job. Bigger job, bigger scope, very exciting for a while. But, you know, now I have been doing, you know, production risk at this point for over 10 years, right? Between the two jobs. You know, I did 6 at NBC, then almost 6 at Viacom. So 12 years. And I was like, there's got to be something more, but I didn't, my excuse, I made excuses. And that's what most people do. They don't change jobs. They make excuses. Well, I had excuses. My husband was working for himself. I was the stable one. Remember, stability, big value, right? I was the one that had the 401k. I was the one that had the long-term incentive plan. I was the one that had the benefits. I didn't have to think about anything. I couldn't change jobs because I was holding down the fort, right? More or less. And so then my husband got a job at Intel. And when he got a job, my whole world crashed because I'm like, I don't have an excuse anymore.
Right.
And that was it. No more excuses. And so that's when I really started to swirl. I was super lost. And so I went to see a career coach. He was okay. Wasn't great. But the one thing he said to me was, figure out your values. And that is where I started to understand the beginning of values. Didn't really understand them until I got certified in coaching. But really, I understood, oh, I'm not really like understanding how to figure out like what I want to do. And so
it's such a critical step. And, you know, distinguishing between what your values are versus what you're actually doing with your time. It's something that I often talk about with
very different
in my book, that, you know, when you really take a moment, take out a piece of paper and write down everything that you value, and then make a column about where you're spending your time. And you will notice there is a huge discrepancy between what you value and what you're actually spending your time on. And when you do that exercise, it is such an incredible reality check. And it's something that we should do, and we should do on a regular basis.
And you have to be
Side
true
of
to
it. I
yourself.
mean, you've just shared so many examples of where those values would trigger points for you. They were catalyst moments for you. And that
They
is so
were.
telling.
And you know, Kathy, you have to be very true to yourself, right? I think I write in the book, you know, Bill Gates loves to read. He's a voracious reader. You could write, I love to read because that's what society tells me I should like to do. But maybe you don't like to read. Maybe you'd rather watch Seinfeld reruns, right? So that's probably not a top value. You might enjoy reading, but you know, casually, maybe a magazine. You have to be really true to yourself. Like, what do you truly think is important to you? That, and also, I think a lot of people focus on strengths. There's all these, you know, Strengths Finder, and I think they're great. All these different tools, and oh, take this test. But you could love math and never want to work in math, right? So I think, you know, really defining your values and making sure that your values are not the same as your friend's values. So you may say family is important to you, and I say family is important to me. And family to me means, you know, my dad, my sister, my husband, my kids, my maybe next relatives. Family to you might mean all of that, plus your uncles, cousins, sisters, brothers, friends, you know, might be, you know, your 50 friends. Those are different values, even though we both said family, right? So really defining them, I think, is the key. And so for me, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I didn't actually know about values like all that much. He kept saying to me, well, figure out what you like to do. What do you like to do? And that wasn't as close to values as, say, you know, what I'm describing here. And so I had all these skills, these random skills and this random experience, and had no idea what I could do with it. None. And so he says, well, start talking to people. So I did. And I talked to a lot of people and couldn't come up with anything. And I looked at legislative aid and I was like, I'm not going to move to Sacramento. And, you know, because I like to write. And I looked at, you know, a bunch of things. I looked at HR. I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to do leave of absences. And, you know, and then I talked to this really lovely man named Nathan. And he was a recruiter, and he had on his LinkedIn profile, hey, if you need career advice, let me know. So I did. I pinged him and I just said, can we talk?
Let's just take that moment, because so many people do offer that out there. There are a lot of people who put that on the table, and a lot of people don't take advantage of that. And I love that you just said, you know what, I'm going to take you up on that. So people out there listening, just do it. Right?
Just do it. What's the worst they can do is say no. I mean, I asked the woman who was in legislature, she was like a legislative aide. I asked her if she would talk to me. She said no. She was, sorry, I'm running for office. I can't, I don't have time. I was like, yeah, I won't be voting for you. Sorry. You know, but he said yes. 6 weeks later, he didn't have time for 6 weeks. So, okay. So I took that phone call and I said to him, all right, here's what I've done so far. I know that here's all my skills. I had identified all my skills. So not really values, but skills. Right. And I know that I don't want to do legislative aid, and I don't really want to do immigration, even though I have experience in that. And I don't really want to do this. And I said, and I don't want to do PR. I can't imagine writing press releases. And he said, well, what about HR business partner? And I said, yeah, no, I don't want to do HR. I don't want to do leave of absences and things like that. And I know I'm in the labor and employment group, but I don't really want to, do that. And he's like, no, it's strategic. He's like, it impacts business. It helps drive business forward. I'm like, wait, what? I had no idea. Never heard of this job. I'd never met an HR business partner that did that. Usually they were, processing whatever I needed in the systems. So started researching it and researching. And I found you can have one title for a job. This is really important. You can say, okay, I want to do business operations, or I want to do HR business partner. But when you look up that title, those job descriptions are very, very different, because every company might use the same title, but they actually consider what they need for that role differently. So I'm looking at it and I'm going, well, I'm like, these I like, but these I don't. Right? The generalist type ones weren't interesting, but any of the ones that said coach, I thought to myself, ooh, that's interesting. Those are really interesting. Well, I coach. Sure. I coach all the time. I coach my leaders on what they should do. And, I coach my colleagues and I coach, but I had no idea. I wasn't coaching. Right. I was advising, consulting, right. Coaching. And so I thought to myself, okay, well, what am I going to do to prove that I can do HR? I mean, I'm coming from production risk. Most people will just see me as a lawyer. what do I do with that? And so I decided that I was going to figure out how to qualify to take the SPHR and the GPHR. Those are certifying exams for HR. Well, I did immigration. I moved people into the country, and I also did foreign travel. I moved them all around the world. And those are two parts of HR in some ways, right? We bring people in, you know, on visas and things like that. So I'm like, okay, I got a little bit there. There's something there, right? I do safety. I was doing some sort of safety on set. So that kind of qualified a little bit. And you have to qualify for these exams. So I qualified for both the SPHR, which is the Senior Professional Human Resources, and the Global Professional Human Resources. Now I had to study, and I studied. And then I also called a bunch of people and said, hey, all these things say coach. I can coach, but do you think I need to get certified in coaching? And all of them said, well, you don't need to. And my big nugget of advice is when somebody says you don't need to and you're transitioning careers, you need to.
You need to.
You need to.
Right. That's an
Because
invitation to yes.
Right. You have to have a way to prove that you know what you're doing. And if there is a certification or a course or something that you can point to, you need to. And trust me, you know, that was the most profound experience probably of my life, is going through these coaching courses, you know, minus of course getting married and having children, since my husband's here. So, you know, so, you know, So I did that, and I was getting certified in coaching, and I studied for these exams, and I passed the exams. They were actually quite hard. I was kind of surprised how hard they were, and got certified in coaching. It took a full year of knowing I wanted to change careers.
Now,
And
let's just remind ourselves that you also had one, maybe the second
I had
daughter, two little children at the time, right?
two little children at the time.
And so everything you're describing, that commitment that you made to yourself, that seeking it out, that seeking advice, asking the hard questions, doing the research, doing the homework that you had to do.
Learning the lingo, right?
Yeah, you really leaned into this. So, you know, I just want to kind of address sort of a big takeaway here, that where there is a will, there is a way.
Oh, there is.
And we so often make excuses for, well, I can't, I've got two little kids at home. I can't because that's too difficult. I can't because I don't have the education for it. You are a shining example, Marlo, of what is possible when you set your mind to something. And you may need a really good partner like your husband to enable some of those moving pieces, which I can attest to in my life, and many of us can if there's somebody else that's helping juggle part of that for us and with us. But that was also a testament to your commitment to make it happen and to figure out how to make it work.
How to make it happen.
You know, it's really important to acknowledge that, because so many people doubt their ability to do something that they want. And all of those things are excuses until they're no longer excuses. So I think it's really important just to.
You have to decide what the right time is for you, but you have to also acknowledge whether you're making excuses, right? Because it's never going to be a perfect time. There's no perfect time for anything, right? We know this. And so you have to just, you know, decide, okay, can I do this job for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of my life? And if the answer is no, then there's no time like the present. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And I just knew I couldn't do that till I retired. I just couldn't.
Right.
So I took the exams, and then I started applying for jobs. And yeah, it wasn't easy. I'll tell you, you have to know how to transfer your skills. So, you know, again, I hadn't identified values. This is the path that I lead people down because it's quicker and easier, right? And it's also more, you know, poignant to you. And then once you identify those values, you identify skills. I had identified skills, right? I didn't learn about
and that's, you know, transferable skills. You know, you talk about transferable skills in your book as well. I mean, that right there is so critical. There are people who don't recognize that they do have skills that could be applied in other industries, that could be applied in other categories of business that they're not realizing. Just because you grew up in the music business and you were in sales doesn't mean that you can't go into sales in some other industry that you're actually really passionate or excited about.
Or even not sales for that matter. I mean, sales skills translate to everything, but you know, every value you can translate to you can define the value, and then you can identify skills. Every single value you have. So if you have, say, I like to distill or analyze information, right? That's what I like to do. I like to look at information, right? And solve problems. right? So what's the value definition for that? Well, for me, if I like looking at information, I would say that I like to solve business problems with that, by distilling information and solving business problems with that, right? I like to drive the business forward. So what are the skills, right? So the skills would be, hard skills. You got hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills are those things that, you actually can see, right? So I like to do data analysis. I can use Tableau or Vizier, right? Whatever tools I can use to data, Excel. I can provide data insights, right? Those are your hard skills. But you have soft skills too. And those are, oh boy, those are so important these days. Soft skills are so important, and sometimes even more important than the hard skills. So detail oriented.
So talk about what those soft skills might be.
So soft skills are the how, right? There's the what and the how. So the what is the hard skills. What can you do, right? What are the physical, results? What are the things that you will produce? The how is how you do it. How do you do it in an office setting and with others cross-functionally? So the how or the soft skills are, okay, I'm detail oriented, or I can work cross-functionally, right? Or I like to work with business leaders on big complex problems and problem solving, right? And I have the emotional intelligence. I'm a great communicator. Those are universal, right? If you've already done any job, you have some soft skills. If you've worked, flipping burgers at McDonald's, you can work in a fast-paced environment, right? That's a soft skill.
Mhm.
Right? You can communicate well because you're communicating with the order taker, you're communicating with your coworkers, right?
Right.
You can be timely on deadlines because you have deadlines to produce the food. It doesn't matter what you do, you have skills. You have skills.
That's interesting because so many people in those positions probably are not framing themselves up that way.
No.
Which, I know you talk a lot about, how to write a resume, how to write a cover letter, some of the most basic and fundamental things. I always say to people, hand your resume to a friend, not a work colleague, because they know things about you that you wouldn't dare consider to be important or relevant.
Mhm.
Your colleagues, of course, will be able to tell you what you do, but it's those other skills that are so important that people don't realize that could really weigh in and make the difference between what you have to say in your resume versus others.
Well, it's true. And also looking at your skills through the lens of the new job. What's the new job that you want to do? Once you've figured out what you want to do, you're not looking at everything you've ever done. Everything you've ever done doesn't go on your resume. I have some great accomplishments, amazing accomplishments, things that I would love to brag about at a dinner party. They are not on my resume because they have nothing to do with HR, nothing. And that's the key, right? Taking the skills of the new job, aligning them to the skills you have and putting that on your resume. And sometimes only 5% of what you actually do goes on your resume because that 5% is what's relevant.
So I'm going to skip ahead because I cannot even believe what time it is as I just glanced at the clock. You just wrote this book, which just came out, and we're putting the links to it, everything, all the links to reach Marlo and to purchase the book on Amazon or Apple or all in the chat, and we'll put it in the show notes as well. But what was the impetus to write this book? Because you're really focused on this space in your life. You're impacting so many people by what you're doing in your coaching business. And now, thankfully, you're scaling that because of what you've put into this book, which is just invaluable information and advice. Tell me a little bit about that journey. We don't have long.
Sure.
We're going to probably creep into about another 5 or 10 minutes. So
Sure. I had a lot of people constantly ask me, how did you do that? When they heard I was a TV news reporter, then I became a lawyer. They didn't think much of the lawyer thing, but then I moved into HR. Like, how did you do that? And after about the 100th person asking me, how did you do that? Right. And then starting to coach clients on how to do that, I realized, wow, there's just so many people you can help if you put all of the tips in a book, like really every last nugget. And I mean examples. And I've never seen a book that has examples. It talks about inspiration, or it talks about you can do it, or it talks about, specific things, but how do you take your values? How do you define them? How do you transfer them to skills? How do you look at those skills and find a career that matches those skills? Then how do you evaluate it against your values again? How do you translate it through the lens of the new job? How do you then update your resume, your LinkedIn, and how do you interview and become that person in that new job, even though you've never done it? All of that's in there. but it's in there in detail, real
Right.
detail, where you can see example after example after example. And then there's stories, of course, of clients who've been successful. And so I think after doing it for so many years myself, and then coaching enough people, I came up with a formula in some ways. It's a little different with each client, right? Every client's a little different, has different needs. But for the most part, there were these foundational things that I was doing with each client that became kind of a formula that I realized if I put it in a book, then I can help more people, because not everybody can talk to me every day.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, it's such an incredible book. It's so robust. It's so rich in terms of the detail, to your point, that it's not like, hey, find out what you love. Okay, great. Now what, now what do I do?
Right.
Which is not an easy thing to do, because it's a very changing world. And I actually wanted to ask you, I think it's so important. We're seeing a lot of people going through transitions because of what we've all been through in the last year and a half. Are you seeing more of a trend of people wanting to switch careers? Are you seeing people sort of getting a taste of the good life of collecting unemployment and staying home in their pajamas and yoga pants and going, well, you know what, I don't have to work so hard, or, they lost their mojo to be on that trajectory to sort of skyrocket and try to hit that glass ceiling? Are we seeing more entrepreneurs in the marketplace? I know a lot of people who are entrepreneurs who are trying to rejigger and rethink their own companies and businesses to keep up with the times and the change of what is going on around us, to be more relevant. So what are some of the trends that you're actually seeing in the industry right now?
You kind of named all of them. I'm seeing all of those. You named them all. You did my job for me here. This is great. You named them all. I mean, every study that comes out is saying anywhere from 40 to 65% of Americans are looking for a new job. They're saying about 40 to 50% want to transition careers to something else. And I think what we saw during the pandemic at the beginning is people were sent home, and those who couldn't work, who were fired, furloughed, they had time on their hands. And then they had an extra paycheck coming in from the federal government. And so with that money, we saw a lot of people go back to school or go get certified in various things and decide, I'm not going to go work that $15 hour job anymore. I want to move into IT, or I want to do something else. And so you saw them take the opportunity to go get educated or to look for that experience of what they could do, something different. Some of them were forced to do something different, right? But we definitely saw that, now that federal funding has dried up, and so people are getting back to work. But 4 million people quit their jobs just last month. We saw 4 million in April. It doesn't mean that they're all unemployed. It means some of them took new jobs somewhere else, right? But we are seeing a tremendous shift in the market of people who are looking for something more meaningful, more substantive, something that really just makes them feel fulfilled is what it boils down to. You're reevaluating.
Yeah, exactly. So what advice would you give to those that are transitioning in careers and trying to find their personal passions and their own self-brand?
I mean, number one is define your values, right? I mean, of course, buy the book. They will guide you the whole way. But I would say don't be fearful. Right? You could be fearful of, well, I'm not going to have the flexibility in the new job that I have with my little children, or, well, it's not a good time, or, well, I'm going to have to take a pay cut. Don't be fearful. When I went from being a lawyer to an HR business partner, I actually got a raise. So just don't just make assumptions, challenge your assumptions. I guess that would be my best piece of advice. Whatever assumption you have about it, challenge it. And somehow find and muster the energy, right? Especially if you're working full time or you have things going on, find the energy to take care of you and say, what do I want to be? Where do I want to be? And don't wait. Just don't wait.
I love that. That's great. You mentioned a little earlier something about the dinner table. I forget what it was, but one of my favorite things to ask people is if you can have a dinner party with a very coveted guest list of whoever you wanted at that table. They could be dead or alive. Are there people in this world that you've inspired you, that are your mentors, that have been role models, that have given you that get up and go attitude? I know you have some incredible quotes from great people in your book. So clearly there are those that have influenced some of your thinking, or that you just align with so well. If there were 3 or 4 people you put at that dinner table with you, aside from Brett and myself, of course, who might that be?
Well, besides my mom, right? My mom passed
Yeah.
away last year. And so besides my mom, I mean, I would love to meet with like Oprah. And the reason why is simply because I've watched her for years. You've watched her go through this just emotional intelligence and self-awareness, this journey. And I'd love to dig in deep on that, right? And see what she's still working on,
Yeah.
right? You know,
And
she's
always, there's always
constant.
something new and more, right? Yeah.
Yeah, she's constant. So from an entertainment perspective, I would say that. I think part of me would love to go back to the 80s in some way. I don't know who I would invite, but I love the quietness of the 80s. There was no cell
Yeah.
phones, you know, you had 13 channels. There wasn't so much to watch on TV. I'd want somebody, who would I take from the 80s that would be interesting?
I'm scared. I'm scared to even think of the
I'm
names
scared to
popping
think
in
of who
my
that would be,
head.
right? Right. But I'm a little nostalgic. So I think
Yeah.
that. And then I would love just somebody who's just super brilliant at a level I will never be, probably Bill Gates or,
Mhm.
Warren Buffett, even.
Yeah.
Probably Warren Buffett, just super
Yeah.
brilliant, like a level of brilliance. I would just like to understand how their brain works.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody
Yeah.
like that.
And how does
So-
someone of that brilliance sit around a table and make small talk? It's kind of a
Oh, I think
fascinating
it would be a
notion
great
as well,
laugh.
right?
I think it'd be a good laugh. I'll bet you they're all really funny.
Exactly.
You'd be surprised
Well,
who has a great humor, right?
I love that. I just love that. I want to thank you, Marlo. I'm going to ask everybody to stay on and we'll do some Q&A, but for the purpose of our podcast, I am going to just thank you and thank our listeners out there for tuning in today. All of the information on Marlo's book, which is called Wanted, A New Career, the definitive playbook for transitioning to a new career or finding your dream job, and her coaching business. All of that will be in the show notes. And I really appreciate you being on here today. For those who are interested in my book, Reinvent Your Life, what are you waiting for? I think if you read hers and mine together, you're just going to be set up for whatever it is that you want to tackle. So I think between the two of us, we've got you covered. Tune in every week to the Power of Reinvention. If you need more information, content, blogs, any of the 100 virtual chats that we've done in the last year and a half, or the 42 podcasts that I think by the time you hear this have been on all of the great podcast platforms, just go to the reinventionexchange.com. And I just want to say thank you, Marlo, for joining us on this podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
It's been so much fun.
Thank you. And we are no longer recording the podcast, so I would love to take a couple of questions if anybody has any for those of us that are already here. So anybody? Yeah, Marvin, who is driving.
No, I'm actually parking, but I don't want to take the seatbelt off just in case.
Okay.
But first of all, thank you so much, Kathy. God, Marlo, like Kathy's roster is unbelievable. I keep telling everybody, Kathy should farm out her roster and she could retire, but she's having too much fun working. So, and I'm having too much fun working with you, so don't retire.
No problem.
My questions are endless, but the most important thing that I think is important for me and maybe the audience is you've actually told somebody to go on a journey and figure out how to do what's the most important thing in your life. What's the first thing that they have to do? And what's the thing that's undeniable, that's a deal breaker? Like, if you do this, everything else will follow, and you have to do this.
The number one thing that they have to do is not have fear. It's the number one thing, because that's why people don't start, is fear.
I think you talk about that in your
I do.
chapter or
In fact,
something.
that's the introduction. Yes, because if you do
yeah,
not get
yeah.
past your fear, the I'm stuck fear, I'm stuck because excuses, the number one thing is excuses and fear, that you have to do that. Because if you can get past that, then you can take the next steps. But if you can't get past that, you will keep getting stuck in fear. So that would be the number one thing. And the second part was, what was the second part?
What is the deal breaker?
Oh, the deal breaker is when things don't match your values. I had a client not long ago who was interviewing, and one of the interviews was super rude, just absolutely rude. And I went back to him and said point blank, I go, does this job match your values? And he's like, and he wanted the job, or he was thinking about the job. And he said, nope, not a value match, period. You have to walk away. I had to do that too. Mine was a little bit different of a journey, but I absolutely had a job that was not a value match. And I think, again, going back to excuses, no excuses of, well, I'll take this job, and if it doesn't work out, then, I'll move on, or, well, I don't have any experience, so this will be something. No excuses, period. And if it doesn't match your values, you say, thank you very much. I don't feel like it's the right fit. And that's it.
That's great.
Thank you.
And I think there's so much to be said for that. I use a big word all the time in our conversations and in my book around feeling entitled, that we have to feel entitled to live our best life. And many people just don't believe that they're entitled. And that word in my book has a very different definition than what one might have thought entitled means, or it means in other contexts. But when you know that you are the center of your world, your universe, your life, you get to call the shots for what it is that you are entitled to do with this life. And it may take 5 minutes to reinvent your life, and it may take 10 years. But if you set your sights on the things that are really going to deliver for you, on, as it says right behind you, do what makes you happy, that is so critical to understand that you are entitled. So when you're trying to work through the fear, remind yourself that you're entitled to create what you want. So don't let the fear get in the way. Let it energize you to go after what it is that you want to have. Do it thoughtfully. Keep in mind all the people that are around you that you're responsible to or for in whatever ways you are. But try to make that plan and work towards it every day.
True. Absolutely. The plan is a big piece of it.
Yeah, most definitely. Anybody else? Anybody who's going through a challenge, who has this incredible coach here on our virtual chat that wants to ask a question or share a thought or a challenge that we've had or I'll be encountering? Josh, I know earlier you wanted to ask or suggest something.
Okay, I have one other question.
Okay, no, go ahead. Sorry, Josh, 1 sec.
Oh, okay. I'll be quick. How much do you give validity to the Myers-Briggs, the Student Vocational Interest Test, the Clifton Strengths Test? How many of those diagnostics do you think are really valuable?
I think tests are great to learn more about yourself. I think you can never know everything about yourself, and you should constantly be evolving. And what your values are when you're younger are not going to be the same values you have when you're older. And so anything that gives you insight into yourself and why you do what you do, I think is great. Are they valuable for career, like looking for your next job or looking for a new career? I think, again, those go more to strengths and where you gravitate. And so, yes, good insight to have, but it's not the whole picture. And I think without your values, you don't have the whole picture. So can you do them? Sure. Are they valuable? Absolutely. I've done many of them. I think they're great things to know about myself, especially if I find a career that is going to play upon one of those strengths. Then I know that I'm going to be really good in that, but maybe I need to work in another area. So I think they definitely help, but they're not the whole picture.
Yeah. Thank you. Josh, real quick, we've got a few minutes. Go for it. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out, Marlo.
Thanks,
Thanks
Josh.
for Kathy for putting on a great show. I'm good. I appreciate it. I'm listening.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Josh. Thank you. Well, look, this has been an amazing conversation. I know we are going to have many more ourselves, Marlo, and lots of opportunities to share your wisdom and your nuggets in all that we're doing with the Reinvention Exchange, my newsletter, and the podcast when it comes out. So thank you for the opportunity to introduce you to our whole community. And I'm just wishing you the best of luck with the debut of your book. Please, everybody, share the word. For those who you know in your life who are struggling or being challenged or just really open-minded right now to what's possible, by all means, just let them know that there are incredible tools and people that could be a part of your future network. I actually would love to add you, Marlo, to the Reinvention Exchange on our links that we have with other people that have great insights and inspire others with
Absolutely.
content. So I'm going to make sure that we add that to our links and a link to your book and to your website so people can tap into you and know how to find you, at least through some of the things that we're doing. So I really want to thank you for
Thank
being here
you.
today.
Thank you,
And
Kathy. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
absolutely. Have a great
Thank
week,
you.
everybody.
You too. Bye, everybody.
Happy reinventing.
That was
Thank you
wonderful.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.